I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We are joined today by a real trailblazer in this space. From Splunk, we have Suzanne McGovern, Splunk's Chief Diversity Officer. Hello, Suzanne. I see you waving there. Thank you. Good to have you.
Thank you.
And we're shaking it up for this episode a little bit. We usually have David hosting, but today's conversation will be facilitated by Khalil Smith. Hello, Khalil.
Hello.
Khalil is our VP of Consulting and Research, while our CEO, Dr. David Rock, will chime in as a subject matter expert. So with that, I'm going to hand off to David. Hello, David, to get us started.
Good to be here. Thanks, Suzanne. I'm just going to share some data and research kind of at relevant points, but I thought it would be really great to have more of a conversation about what D&I looks like in an organization. I know Splunk are doing some fantastic things, and Khalil, over to you to run the conversation. I'm here as needed.
Wonderful. And when you say as needed, just know I'm going to pull you in from time to time, so don't go too far away. Right. Suzanne, it's a pleasure to be on with you and to have this conversation. And thank you for spending some time with us. And thanks to all of our listeners for getting in. I'll dive in because I've got a bunch of questions. But first and foremost, I just kind of want to recognize times are reasonably pretty tough right now. So first, how are you and your family doing? And how's your extended family at Splunk doing?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Khalil. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm very, very grateful. Myself and my family are doing fine right now. Our extended Splunk family are coming together at these difficult times. So, when you think about that, we had COVID, which really disproportionately impacted many of our minority groups at Splunk. And then, the recent death and murder of George Floyd, the social unrest that followed, it's really traumatizing, to be frank, to many of our Black Splunkers, our people of color. And really, we're trying to come together and just listen more and with empathy and, give each other a little bit more understanding at this moment.
I love that. Thank you for sharing, and I'm glad to hear that you're doing as well as can be expected right now. And thank you for your leadership. I know a number of folks that are on the line are in some type of diversity and inclusion work, and obviously with yourself as a Chief Diversity Officer, I'm sure a lot of eyes turn to you around what should we do and what's our response and where are we going. And so I hope you're also taking some time to take care of yourself. I'll pivot a little bit. It's always a bit of a challenge to pivot from that conversation, but I am curious to understand how have the recent protests and I think you could arguably call it societal upheaval affected your D&I strategy? What are you either doubling down on or doing differently?
So we're continuing with our 3-pillar approach to D&I, and I'll come on to talk about that. Around workforce, workplace, marketplace, around continuing to improve our representation, around continuing to develop our wonderful million data points culture of inclusion at Splunk. I can talk about that too. And really working with our customers and partners to improve our communities in the world. That said, there's been some really immediate things that we've been doing right now. First of all, we've started listening sessions with all of our employee resource groups. So really trying to listen to better understand, not necessarily to reply in this moment, with compassion and empathy, to understand the lived experience of all of our Splunkers. And really, when have they felt included at Splunk? When have they felt less included at Splunk? What can we do to sort of change our house from the outside in to help accelerate change in this moment? We've also donated to the Urban League in conjunction, that's at the advice of our Beams group. Representing here, that's our Black employees at Mentors. We chose the Urban League because they do work in local chapters where we have offices like the Bay Area, like DC. We've also stood up a learning path, actually a LinkedIn learning path on racial equity and social justice. So for example, as a white woman, it is my job to get educated in this moment. It is not the job of Splunkers in minoritized groups to take on that extra burden. So we've stood up this learning path that's got resources, it's got videos, it's got education. We started precise language education, again with our e-staff and pushing that down. We were delighted we had, I don't know if you know DeRay McKesson. So he's a Black Lives Matter leader and civil rights leader. He came to talk to us about using data to help to mitigate police brutality. We've also, our Chief Products Officer, Sender Selakumar, has come out and said, racial terminology has no place in our products, so we're cleaning up our source code and language around that.
Wow.
We already had allyship circles at Splunk before this moment. The beautiful thing right now is they've tripled in size. There's a lot of allies want to practice allyship as a verb, right, and actually get involved and do something, which is a beautiful thing. We had Juneteenth as a holiday last week, so that we gave all Splunkers time to sort of reflect in this moment, again, to get educated, right, to develop a better understanding. And our e-staff published a commitment last Friday on Juneteenth to racial equity and social justice. And so we've actually expanded our charter in D&I to be diversity, equity, inclusion. So not equality, equity, which is quite important. We've opened 2 new recs as well in my team, which is great, as we've expanded that charter. Our Beams group are doing enormously great work right now. They had a table talk panel discussion this week on the Black experience. They had over 800 Splunkers attend. And really there's a lot of energy right now because we want to continue our journey, but we want to use this terrible moment to accelerate our rate and pace of change and the social change.
Yeah. Wow. After all that, I want to ask, is there anything you're not doing? Oh my gosh. Apart from sleeping, maybe.
Yeah, got a lot of that going on right now.
Yeah. Suzanne, one of the things that I recognize, I was so eager to get into the conversation. I didn't even ask you to talk a little bit about what Splunk does. So when you talk about kind of these 2 new recs, I would imagine you're going to get quite a few of the people that are on the line saying, interesting. Yeah. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about kind of who Splunk is and what you do and kind of how you fit into the marketplace?
Sure. So we are the data to everything platform. We believe in bringing data to every decision, every action, every question, to really shine a light on where we're doing well, where we're not so doing well. So for example, in DE&I, we use data to share where we're doing well on representation, on hiring, on retention, again, where we're not doing so well. We also firmly believe in transparency around data. So it's one of our core values, openness, and it's incumbent on folks in our industry, I believe, to share their D&I data, to be really honest. If you don't measure it, it doesn't get done. Just to share and be honest about what our representation looks like and where we're doing well, where we've got more work to do. And we're continually kind of trying to develop and use data. We have something called the DISCO at Splunk, because we love a pun, which is the D&I at Splunk Council. And what I do there is I share data every quarter with our functional leaders, with our geo leaders, and really try and activate all the organization around DE&I and hold everyone accountable. So again, we share data every quarter, where we're doing well, where we're doing not so well. We have goals around diversity and inclusion. And we check in on those leaders every quarter. We also really have this beautiful million data points culture of inclusion at Splunk. And that's a video campaign. You can go see it on our website. It's our most downloaded piece of content, where our Splunkers are actually turn up with tremendous courage and share whether they are an animal lover, a chef, an opera singer, whether they're straight, whether they're gay, whether they're trans, all of the different identities that make them themselves. And so, for example, Khalil, if I was introducing myself to you, I would say from a million data points perspective, hey, Khalil, I'm Suzanne. I am an immigrant. I'm a mother. I am cisgender female. My pronouns are she and her. My husband is African. He's Nigerian. He's Black. My 3 kids are biracial. Our au pair is from Colombia. My sister's gay. I helped her come out. I have a new sister that we celebrated their wedding last year in London, called Lydia. So just trying to break down that name, rank, serial number and give it as an organizational habit, particularly in hypergrowth. It's super important to us. And we have 9 ERGs at Splunk. So more than half of Splunkers are members, followers, or allies of our employee resource groups, which actually means that there's majority group folks in there. So there's a lot of white straight males in our Women Plus group. And that's when you get longer term change. We also have our Splunk for Good arm, our corporate social responsibility arm. We've increased volunteer time in this moment to 40 hours to really let our Splunkers go do work in their community, go volunteer, and we're committed to donating $100 million in Splunk licenses and education to not-for-profits.
Wow.
That's a
David,
lot. Just a quick comment, if I may, a quick couple of comments. Firstly, just for context, because I know it took me a while to understand Splunk. I mean, you're in many ways a technology firm. I think about 5,000 people.
6,000 now.
6,000 employees.
Growing, David. Yeah.
So, I mean, $100 million commitment from 6,000 employees is a real commitment. That's a serious commitment. And then you're, San Francisco headquarters in the city of San Francisco, but quite global as well. So, interesting. You're in the heart of, the technology world, and sounds like, really leading the way in many ways. And I love the example of that habit. That's a habit every single employee could repeat many, many, many times. It's gonna really start to change the fabric of how people see each other. It's a really great habit.
Yeah.
Well, it really helps with it bringing your whole self to work, right? And not trying to cover or wasting energy, not being yourself, right? We need to harness the power of every Splunker to be successful. So, yeah.
David, it feels like there's a natural connection. And Suzanne, as you were talking, there were all of these things that were coming out. You were talking about the listening circles that you all have been doing, kind of the groups coming together. You're talking about kind of ways that you've been, what I would argue is kind of acting boldly, right? Increasing your contribution, increasing kind of the way that you all show up. And I hear you talk about Splunkers and talk about it in such kind of familial terms. David, I wonder if maybe you'd feel comfortable going to, I knew there were a couple slides that you'd prepared in advance, around some language that we've been talking about quite a bit, and kind of leadership in this moment that I think could be really helpful in framing what I'm hearing that Suzanne and team are just doing very naturally, that I think, others might not be doing as naturally. They could use a bit more of a framework around it. And David, you muted.
Too many things at once.
So you thought you were done talking, then I roped you back in.
Can you see the slide there?
Yes.
So yeah, this is a piece Khalil and I wrote. Actually, I think it was 3 weeks ago now, which is incredible. It feels like a minute ago, where we got together. Khalil and I got together also with our researchers and others and said, look, all these companies are like really anxious about just what to do. CEOs are like caught in this bind of, do I say nothing? Like, actually, that's not a good idea. That's not going to work at all. That there's a whole energy around that being complicit in this moment. But then what do I say? And actually we said, maybe it's not saying, maybe it's the critical things to move through this level of really human rights movement and be a positive contribution to it is listen deeply, where you're really connecting on a very, very deep human level, having more empathy and more listening than you've ever had. Then bringing people together around common goals, as opposed to the sort of dividing that's happening. But the bringing people together is such an important act. And then that's really a kind of 1-2 to then do something bold, as Splunk are doing here. So it is all in the act boldly, but first you need to listen deeply and see where you need to act, and then bring people together and then act boldly. So this is online. One of our team can put this in the chat, so you can kind of read this and share this. And then we've also been doing some briefings internally with organizations on, and even supporting companies with listening circles, all sorts of things we've been doing now to kind of help move this along. But that's the framework. Khalil, anything you want else to add there?
No, I think you articulated it beautifully, and I would just love to maybe, Suzanne, toss it back to you, because again, it seems like you all have been doing this very naturally, and you've all, like everything that you've described, at least from my point of view, kind of fits into some of these spaces. But I'm just curious, as you hear that frame, or as you think about the way that you all have been approaching it, is there anything that comes out to you as you think about kind of listen deeply, unite widely, act boldly?
Yeah, and I do want to say, Khalil, that we're on a journey here, right? And thankfully, we've not a standing start, but we want to continue to evolve that DE&I journey and really to extend our charter to equity. But we have not solved this. I want to be absolutely crystal clear, right? This is a long-term journey, and we want to use this moment to accelerate the pace of change and get more systemic change. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right that the listening sessions for us have been so illuminating. So what we do is we have 3 E-staff members, executive staff members, so we don't mess up the power dynamic, right? We don't need too many of them. Right. But with our ERG folks, and really just understanding their lived experiences, the challenge they have themselves, inside Splunk and outside, but really when are they being included, when are they not? And it's very unique. So we have 9 employee resource groups at Splunk. So we have our beams, our Black employees and mentors. We have a Filipinx group. We have Somos, our Latinx group. We have a Natives group as well. So very different challenges right now for our Black group and our people of color. But then we also have our Disabled Equals True group and our Neurodiversity group, who were, again, like our people of color, hit very hard and disproportionately with COVID. But now, again, in this moment too, the trauma that they're kind of dealing with. We also have a veterans group, which are acutely reminded at this moment of some really traumatic things that many of them have gone through, and particularly around things like PTSD and stuff. We have our pride group, the rolling back of LGBTQ plus rights at this moment too is really alarming. So, and then also our Women Plus group. So hearing from them and hearing their distinct challenges right now, and just doing that real listening. We're not acting right now, but we will act in a month once we've synthesized all the feedback. And we are, as David said, we are speaking out. We're giving Juneteenth as a holiday. We're doing some bolder things that we've never done in the past, and really trying to use this moment to drive systemic change.
Love that. Thank you. So I think to your point around, this isn't new. It isn't completely solved. You all have been doing this work for some time. I would love to hear, and for our obviously attendees to hear, how Splunk has taken a systemic approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that approach has potentially prepared you for this moment. Because you spoke a little bit about some of the things that have been shifting, but I'm curious about some of the things that you would say, this is what we were doing before that has actually kind of lifted us up and protected us in some ways from what's going on right now.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure that anyone would be fully prepared for this moment. I do think, however, we have a good foundation. And again, we start in-house, right? I'll just be totally candid. I'm not a great lover of like grand external corporate statements that's going to try and fix 400 years of systemic racism, internally in a couple of months. So we start internally first. That's where we're focused. As I mentioned, we are the data to everything company. So we use data and evidence and hard facts to drive what we're doing. So we know where we are. So for example, we published our diversity annual report last month for 2019, and it showed us where we're doing well. It also showed us where we have much more work to do. So for example, we're doing really well year on year hiring women. We're doing really well on female representation in leadership and management. We've improved our hiring of Black and African American folks. We've got more Black and African American folks in leadership and management positions than ever before. That said, we're not doing so well. We have a new intersectional cut of data. We're not doing so well on retaining Black and Latinx women. So really shining a light on, this is what's working, this is where we're doing well, but this is what we need to do more of. So I think having that foundation has really helped us, because we know where we are, to focus on this moment and really take in more inputs and understand where we are and how to respond and to make it a movement, right? Not a moment.
Just on that, there's an interesting couple of questions coming in around measurement, given you're a data company and all that, how, if at all, are you measuring people's sense of belonging? Like, is there a way that you do that? And what's your thoughts, and how are your thoughts about that evolving?
We've, in our commitment to racial equity and social justice, we're going to take our existing measurement further. So what we've done in the past is more of a survey, and I'm happy to say that D&I came up as the biggest engagement factor for Splunkers, so 87% above kind of industry standards. So again, that's something very unique to Splunk. It's kind of the nicest culture I've been part of in 20-something years at tech. But we are going to go further in this moment now with more surveys on equity and belonging. And we have a vendor right now. We're also working with another vendor looking at our mission, vision, and values. And they also provide some other additional survey tools. So we're evaluating which one to go with at this moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've been doing some work, maybe Khalil, you can speak about it, kind of trying to help companies see where they are, but more from the perspective of where they need work on their systems to really create change. So we think in terms of kind of priorities, habits, and systems. So we've been doing what we call a coherence analysis, which kind of looks right at their systems and says, hey, where are you accidentally having bias woven in through maybe hiring, assigning, rewarding, promoting, some of the stuff. And this was sort of something we did a little bit, and then suddenly started to really explode and companies are interested. Khalil, can you speak a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I can. And I'll take just a little bit of a step back as well, because some people may not be as familiar with priorities, habits, and systems. But again, Suzanne, it sounds like you all have just kind of naturally fit into quite a bit of that and are doing that work. But your point around, that you're not as big a fan of the kind of grandiose statements that don't actually change anything internally. That's what a lot of our research has found, is that the priority setting, that initial stage of helping people to orient, to understand that something is important, to pay attention to something is critically important, and yet it's not enough, right? And so those statements can be wonderful, and we've seen them on the intranets, or the CEO stands up and says something, and they have the best of intentions, but nothing actually changes. And so the focus has to be on the habits as well. So you were talking before around, you've created a habit for the way that people introduce themselves. You've created that habit around the 1 million data points, right? And so all of this is around, this is what we do when we talk about culture as shared everyday habits. And so if people are doing these things on a regular basis, they just become the air that we breathe and the water that we swim in, as opposed to being something completely separate. And then you've also created the systems. And so the systems, lastly, are that thing that either reinforce the priorities and the habits or undercut them. And so when you say, hey, everybody, we want you to do this, and yet we're not going to recognize you for it or reward you for it, we're going to make it more challenging to be able to accomplish that thing, then you're much less likely to get it to happen. And so, David, to your point around the coherence analysis, it really is coherence between, are the things that we're saying the same things that we're demonstrating, the same things that we're rewarding and kind of, respecting and encouraging in our organization. And if those things don't fit, then that's where we start to see things fall apart. And I think part of why you're seeing and experiencing this systemic change in the real value that you've got is that you're lining up what you're saying with the habits that you're demonstrating, with the systems and the mechanisms that you have in place. And we've seen that be incredibly powerful. And actually, David, I think you had a slide around some research that we had done. We're not a data everywhere company in the exact same way, but we are a research company. And so had done some research, I think it was 2018, in terms of connecting with about 41 different companies across 7 different countries to understand what works. So David, would love for you to speak to that a little bit, because out of that was the birth of priorities, habits, and systems.
Yeah. No, we saw that. It was really interesting. We were actually, it was a couple of years before that, I was running an event for chief diversity officers. I think we had 80 chief diversity officers in a room in Silicon Valley. And I was asking them all about where their biggest focuses were. And we literally put them up on the board of all the things that they were doing. And I put this whole list up and I looked at it, I went, wow, every single one of those is actually about making diversity and inclusion a priority, but none of them are about kind of the next step, the harder thing. I was really curious, and it sort of made us really think about kind of really differentiating between, making things a priority and then actually doing the harder work. And we saw that there's a really different kind of work in building habits, which have to be, one at a time and everyone involved and take a lot of attention. And that's different work to putting in place your systems that reward and encourage and nudge and all this stuff. And it's almost like if you're trying to stop smoking, it's great to get motivated, but what you really need is a patch every day. And you also need to change your friends. That's the system part. And so you sort of need all three, but everyone anchors too much on the, let's just make this a priority. And we were looking at this recently, and it was sort of thinking about what companies are doing right now in this crisis. And we sort of listed all the things that are happening. And we said, wow, these are almost all just kind of about making things a priority, not about the harder work. So anyway, we going back to your question, what we did was looked at a bunch of companies and said, essentially, what rating would we give them for diversity and inclusion? And on average, the success of their initiatives would be rated an F if you're using a university system on an A to F scale. And even the companies that were rated much more successful in D&I were getting a D. I mean, it's just the whole space it just hasn't been getting the kind of results that that are necessary. And so we started to think a lot more about the kind of what's the gap. And for us, it was really separating that work out and saying, look, great to make things a priority, but what's the equivalent of putting the patch on that actually really changes behavior day to day. And I love the example that Suzanne's got of the the introduction with all those points. I think we might have to borrow that in Ally, start doing that internally. I really like it. It's a great one. So yeah, Khalil, back to you.
Yeah, wonderful. Suzanne, so I'm curious, based on kind of everything that we've been talking about and the habits and kind of the work that you've done, I know that one of the things that you all did was really kind of rally around unconscious bias education and the behavior change, right? The real habits part of this. I'm curious what you're seeing differently now compared to before you embraced it, both the kind of unconscious bias and potentially the focus on habits and or behavior change.
Yeah. First of all, I do want to say that we do love unconscious bias at Splunk. It plays really well, I think, with a technical audience. We're a very technical company because of the research element, right? It's really sticky. It's something that everyone can kind of grab onto and understand. And the seeds model, the way that you break that down, has become part of our vernacular at Splunk. So you will hear people saying, hey, have I asked Khalil, because Khalil's in, Tokyo right now, have I asked him for his opinion? So it really has shown up in our language, and we do recognize that we can't eradicate unconscious bias, but we can call it out and we can use it to mitigate and try and work with it. So it's been really, really great for us. We rolled out unconscious bias to all of our Splunkers, and now we basically roll it out to all new managers. So really, really important for us.
Hey, Suzanne, a question on that. Sorry, Cliff.
No, please.
How often, like how many times a week do you find yourself in a meeting where someone, either you or someone else, calls out one of the biases? So how many times a week, or a month if it's not a week? What do you think on average, where someone says, hey, that sounds like a safety bias, or that sounds like a, what do you think?
Probably, for me, it's probably 2 or 3 times a week. We do hear it regularly. As I say, it's become part of our vernacular, and it's become a kind of safe and independent way to call out bias when we see it, and just be really honest about it, so.
Yeah, no, we collected some data on this, and actually I was blown away. I was just blown away with what we were starting to see. We just updated this a couple of weeks ago. Our CX team looked out, and we gathered data from everyone we could possibly kind of put together into a set. And it ended up being a really big set of folks. It was 9,500 people that we're able to collect data from individuals, and basically ask that question: how many times in the last week did you find yourself, noticing a bias and doing something differently? And what we found was that 78% of people, just in that last week, had done something at least 1 to 3 times. And that's really exciting. That tells us that the SEEDS framework is what we would call disruptive language. It's actually in the conversation, and it's changing things. And I got excited about this. I kind of brought something back that we've been playing with a few years ago, especially where there's such a focus on, systemic bias, the systemic issues in society. And you can't, as a company, tackle all of society, but you can tackle systemic bias in your organization. And I started to put some numbers to this and think about, look, if you're a company of 10,000, just to round it up, you guys 6,000, if you're a company of 10,000, what does it look like in terms of the number of kind of bias issues that should be being, looked at? And it was really mind-blowing. Basically, if you're a company of 10,000, you should have about 500,000 acts of bias mitigation a year across both people issues and business issues. So all the people stuff, right? Hiring, assigning, rewarding, promoting, also all the business decisions. And that's, I think, what it's going to take to get systemic change in organizations. And then the actual mitigation has to actually look very, very, very effective. It can't just be, oh, well, we've got a bias. What do we do? And we started to sort of get much more tactical about kind of explaining, what that mitigation looks like. There's kind of stuff in the moment where someone might say, oh, that sounds like a safety bias. What would we tell someone else here? Or it's the if-then plan, which is the really big one. Like if we have an investment over $1 million, then we'll invite a diverse panel to review. And then the really big effects are at the preventative measures level, where you're you're taking bias out at the root. So the 500,000 acts of bias mitigation could be any of these, but the big ones will be, if-then plans and preventative measures. But anything you can speak to about this? I know we didn't prepare you, just kind of dropped in my head, but what have been some of your most effective if-then plans you've seen or others have seen, or what have you seen around preventative measures there as well?
What's coming up for me was, so we do the learning itself, but then we kind of doubled down on, sort of offsites and stuff. And I remember facilitating our legal department on this and if-then statements. And it was really around, them wanting to enable the organization to grow and to scale and to not slow us down, but fighting against their own conservatism and their own risk-averse nature, which is what they're paid to do, right? Is to protect us against risk and stuff. And I do remember some really, kind of quite profound sort of, if I, kind of start with risk, I'm actually going to start with growth and growth mindset, and then come back to where's our legal exposure residing. So wow. Definitely like intent there, and it's great seeing that, when you actually see it more live in an offsite and people committing to the change. So yeah, that was one that came up for me there, David.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks. That would be, can we teach all lawyers that? That would be really great.
I didn't say we quite got there on all of the execution, but the intent is there and they're trying for sure.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So yeah, this concept has been really helpful to us, and we're starting to now measure, based more on this kind of data and, see what's really happening. But every team that learns this work we're seeing is starting to put in place these if-then plans and preventative measures, really quickly. And that learning, by the way, this data is from an extremely light learning solution. There's no workshop involved in that data. Actually, I'll stop that share. So this is this is from a very, very scalable, light digital, solution there as well. Khalil, back to you. Where would you like to go?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Suzanne, I would just love to understand, based on a lot of the things that you're doing and all of the kind of wonderful work, what's next for your D&I strategy?
I mean, we will stick to our three-pronged strategy, our three-pillar strategy. It's workforce, workplace, marketplace. It is in that order. I mean, I think David touched on this. We got to sort out our own house first. We got to change the world from the inside out. So it's workforce, it's improving our representation. It's workplace, it's continuing to steward that beautiful million data points culture of inclusion. And marketplace, how do we, connect with our broader ecosystem of partners and customers, and communities to really change the world. But we do have to, once the listening sessions are done, is really to synthesize all of that feedback, all of that information, and then prioritize our roadmap, right? We're not going to fix some of these really long-term systemic issues, but we can indeed prioritize. We can say, okay, in the short term, this is what we're going to focus on and what we're going to do longer term. So really, as I say, trying to use this moment to catalyze our response for systemic change.
Yeah, that's great. And Suzanne, I'm curious because, as I talk to companies and talk to senior leaders, one of the things that they're expressing is that there are some folks that have this real desire to, exactly what you described, leverage the moment, capitalize on the moment. And yet for them, that means immediately right now, we need to do something. And so what I hear you all saying is like, we want to pause, we want to listen, we want to really understand the challenge before we do that. What guidance or recommendations might you give to others around why it's valuable to kind of make sure that you understand the problem first, or how to have that conversation with others that are saying, but no, we already know what it is. Let's just go off and do.
Yeah, I think we were just really mindful that if we didn't listen to as many diverse voices as possible and understand the lived experience of many of our Splunkers, that we'd miss something. And there's also actually tremendous power in having these conversations, right? To actually have difficult conversations on race. And giving people the language. So it's great that we've got unconscious bias education. We're going further now in our education on precise language and on racial equity, and giving people the tools and practicing uncomfortable conversations. And as you know, Khalil, these don't come easy. We're all uncomfortable with this. I get it wrong regularly. Yep. I generally preface every conversation exactly with I'm really sorry, I don't have the words for all of this, but I really want to learn. And I think if we can make, again, that a kind of habit of checking in with folks on naming the issue, on talking about uncomfortable topics, and really having robust, because we know people don't leave their experience at our virtual doors. It comes with you to work. So how do we acknowledge, and how do we empathize, and how do we do it with compassion? But not doing it for just listening's sake, but you know, as I say, that will become part of the plan. But I think beginning those conversations and having those difficult conversations in the right way, and developing language and precise language around it, in and of itself, it is a good habit to start to bring.
That's super helpful. And I want to come back to this idea of kind of allyship, because you spoke about that at the very beginning of the conversation that we were having. And we've been doing a bit more work around it as we've heard more organizations say they're interested in it. But before I do that, you know, a lot of what we've been talking about is at the organizational level, or, you know, kind of what it looks like across an entire company. And I'm curious, Suzanne, as comfortable as you are being kind of vulnerable, what, if anything, would you personally change about how you've gotten to this point? Or what advice would you give to a leader who's maybe earlier in their journey and, you know, isn't as comfortable with some of those uncomfortable conversations or any of the work around DE&I?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've got to say, in terms of the changes, I actually appreciate them all. And I have made mistakes. I've made many of them, thankfully. None to date have been kind of cataclysmic, but you know, in the spirit of growth mindset, I really appreciate the failures as well. It's one of the toughest ways, but one of the most best ways to learn, right? So I'm very thankful for the stuff I've got wrong. I think it's really being open to learning all the time, and to understand that this is not your sole job, right? In order to do this well, and as I say, we are on a journey, you've got to activate the entire organization. You know, you've got to listen with empathy and compassion. You've got to be open to learning all the time, even if it's planned or unplanned, and be able to course correct and go with it. It's organic, but really to drive accountability in your organization. Do it with data, do it with evidence, do it with facts, do it in a non-confrontational and independent way, and just leveraging the differences to make us stronger, right? And to really, again, change the world from the inside out.
Love that. Thank you. I think that's amazing advice for all of us. So I'll invite David back into the conversation as well, but I know you spoke about allyship before and that you all have been doing some work around this. So anything you're comfortable sharing, would love to understand kind of how you all have maybe defined it, and what you're doing with that. Because we're, you know, kind of going through the research and the literature and really continuing to formulate our own point of view on it. And I'd love just selfishly to understand how you all have been approaching it.
Yeah, so we have an allyship group, the same as we have our ERGs. So it's an affinity space for folks who want to help, folks who are generally in majority groups who want to help. And as I say, we did allyship circles monthly. They emanated with some folks who wanted to help our Black employees and mentors, our Beams group. And then it's really grown, as I say, since the civil unrest that's happened, that's kind of tripled in size. And the channel, we have a Slack channel for allyship, has really exploded right now. So with resources, with articles, with best practice, you know, so it's a great resource for all of our Splunkers to go in and to join. And then those allyship circles, they take on different topics each month, and they vote them through. And as you can imagine, the one recently was really around what can we do in this moment to be better allies for our Black employees and mentors. And, you know, I think all of us are kind of reflecting in this moment. And, you know, I know personally just the desire and some guilt, frankly, into why have I not done more? You know, I knew a lot of this stuff, but why didn't I push this further? But really, again, taking that kind of negative energy in that place of guilt and defense and stuff, and into, okay, so what can I do now? Yeah. How can we use this moment to accelerate? How can we use this moment to go faster? How can I show up and really fill the void if I see one of my colleagues who might be a person of color? How can I take that conversation forward? How can I call it out when I see it? As I say, it is not the job of minoritized groups right now to be educating people in the majority. And I've never seen our allyship practice being so vibrant as in this moment, which is a beautiful thing to see.
Amazing. David, I know you've had a couple conversations as well with various clients, and you know, I can talk a little bit about kind of where the research is going, but would love to get your point of view on this as well.
Just a quick comment. I think the research perspective is really important. I know we put a team to really accelerate our research in this space. We've actually been researching this for a few years. We launched a solution in the last 2 years with a major firm on Allyship. It's been extremely well received. We actually just had an organization of about 100,000 people say they're going to have every single employee go through an Allyship learning solution, which was really exciting to hear for many, many reasons. But we're starting to see this, huge commitment to it. But, we've been in the space, we've been building some solutions and we're kind of doing stuff here. But I also, as I started to look into the research, our research team produced an internal report on kind of the space. It was really interesting to see kind of how much noise there is in it, how much confusion there is in it, and actually that there's a real opportunity to anchor on a few really critical habits and make sure they're science-based. And that's kind of something that we're thinking about. Khalil, do you want to speak to that a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I would add to that, and then I know we have a couple polls that we'd love to kind of get people's point of view and kind of, test the waters of the group that we have together, is this idea that as we've talked about inclusion over the years, one of our mantras has always been, if you're not actively including, you're probably accidentally excluding. And Suzanne, one of the things I loved hearing from you is that, as a part of your ERGs, there are people that don't necessarily align with that particular demographic that are a part of that ERG, right? They're listening, they're understanding, they're figuring out how they can be supportive. And so, as we've looked through the literature, there are certain myths about it that, this isn't my place to be an ally because I shouldn't be speaking about that if I'm not a part of that group. Or, I could potentially look as if I'm trying to be like a savior to that group. And so, silence is safety and I'm just going to take a step back and, they'll take care of themselves. And not a lot of it is through malice, right? A lot of it is through ignorance. And I mean that in a really positive way. I just don't know any better. And so Suzanne, that thing that you spoke about, I've called them, with my own groups, clumsy conversations. And to your point, they're not easy for any of us. I have struggled with, how do I call this moment in time? Is it civil unrest? Is it racial unrest? Is it racial trauma? Is it, it's all of these things, and we find ourselves freezing. And when you feel like the silence is safety and that it's easier to not say anything, we put ourselves in a position where we're not actually moving the conversation forward. And so there always needs to be this balance of, how do I, afford enough grace that, Suzanne, when you and I are having the conversation and you say something a little clumsy, I'm like, but I know where she's coming from, right? Or when I say something clumsy, you're like, okay, I know where we're going there. And I think that's a part of the larger goal of the organization. And part of what we're thinking about as well is we work with a bunch of incredible researchers that study things like in-group and out-group and political polarization and all of that. There's just a lot to be said around how we come together and collaborate. And allyship is a critical component of that. So for us to understand it as it relates to the larger body of research as a whole is really important. Because to your point, David, we can and all should be allies for one another, because even if I'm a majority group in one demographic, I may be a minority in another demographic. And so how do we speak up from a position of authority or privilege or power in any of the places where we might not have the same?
Yeah, I love that frame, Khalil, clumsy conversations. It's really great. And I see some great comments about that in the chat as well. It really labels something important, just because you're feeling clumsy about it, just go in anyway and be, have a growth mindset and be, like thoughtful about people's intent rather than just, so I think, Suzanne, any comments on sort of clumsy conversations and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, actually, what was coming up for me when Khalil was speaking was from one of our listening sessions, we got a great story from one of our Black Splunkers. So she is very early in career, very senior, amazing talent, real kind of go-getter. And when the whole George Floyd thing exploded the other weekend, as a Black female, she decided on the Sunday, she's like, right, I'm going to go into my team. We're going to have, a really candid conversation about this. As a Black leader, I need to be talking about this. But what happened on the Monday morning was she was in her leadership team meeting, so her upline, and they didn't really have the conversation. And then, so what happened is she went into her team, and guess what? She was like, okay, I'm not feeling psychological safety in this moment, so I'm not having the conversation. She said, and then that night I'm thinking, oh my God, I have a responsibility in this moment. I should have done something. And now there's a void happening, right? And now people are not talking about it. And she feels unsafe, her team feel unsafe, and that can quickly get exacerbated. thankfully, I think it was like on the Tuesday, Wednesday, one of her leaders kind of spoke to her individually, and she was like, okay, good. This is a safe space. I can talk about this. I need to talk about this in my team. So I think a big act of allyship there is, again, if you're a white person in this moment, if you're a member of a majority group, you know, you've got to start having these conversations. You've got to give that place of safety, and you've got to name it. Otherwise, back to your point, David, you're part of the problem.
Yeah, it's great. We've got some polls. We're really curious about allyship. You know, we're really interested at NLI to understand kind of how folks are seeing it and how much should we lean into it, obviously. Just some quick polls that we'd want to go through. If you kind of bear with us, it'd be really helpful for us to know how to serve you and also serve the wider audience. Gabe, let's throw those up. We'll do those pretty quickly so we can get pretty quick responses. So the first one, does your organization already have an allyship resource? And just a response there. Be really helpful for us. Thanks very much. Got about 50. I think we've got about 200 plus people on the line. Let's get to well over 100. We're up to 75. Keep them coming. Give it another 10 seconds or 5 seconds. Actually, let's close it off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We can close it off, Gabe. Yeah, interesting. So yeah, so about a bit more than a third, you don't have something, but it's something that's coming up, and about a third never heard of such a thing. Interesting. So some mixed data there. Thanks very much. There's another poll there as well. I think we've got another one to jump into. How much of a priority is it at your organization? Is interesting. Then maybe we can go to the commitment one. We've got about 100. That was a quick response there. Let's give that a little bit more. We'll close it off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thanks, folks. Appreciate it. And then we've got one more, I think, on commitment, just kind of where you are. That's interesting. It's coming out more and more for about 30% of you. And then the final one on commitment. I think if we've got that one, Gabe. What's your plan with focusing on allyship? So you're not going to focus on it. You want to support, you're going to do it yourselves. You want to partner externally, or you want someone to do all of it for you. Just get a sense of kind of where people are. We're up to 50. We can get a few more responses. It'd be much appreciated. 75. We can close that off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fantastic. Thanks very much, everyone. Appreciate that. Yeah, so about 2/3 of people want to do it, want to do something yourselves. About 30% want some help, and only 7% not going to focus on this for now. That's good to see. So there's a real push and real focus on this topic. Thanks very much for everyone willing to do that. Suzanne, any thoughts internally on what you guys want to do with allyship and sort of how you want to push it forward to the next level?
You know, we're just going to wait to see how it evolves. We have, as I say, a really active allyship group right now, and we have our circles. So likely what we're starting to see happen is maybe an alignment of some of our allies with our ERGs. So really, so Women Plus already have it, Beams already has it, but for our other ERGs, who actively wants to be in that particular space? Because as I said, each of the challenges of these groups are quite unique and quite different. So we're waiting to see how that evolves.
Yeah, fantastic. Khalil, back to you. We've got maybe a couple more comments before we start to close off.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Suzanne, maybe as we're going through to see if there are any, specific questions, would just love to give you a moment to just kind of anything that you would add towards the end. I mean, you shared so much amazing around what you all are already doing and what you're thinking, but any final thoughts or anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to share?
No, you were pretty thorough, Khalil. Thank you. I would say, though, as a company that profoundly believes in the power of data, we also know that we've got a huge opportunity to learn and to do better in this moment. So really, we'll continue here in Splunk to use data on our DE&I journey, and so that we can drive, you know, much better outcomes for our company, our communities, and the world.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Suzanne. And David, would love for you to maybe just kind of, you know, close us out and talk a little bit about some of the things, the places we can support. But just really quickly, Suzanne, thank you so much for the contribution and the conversation and for all of the partnership that we've had over the years. It's been absolutely incredible. So thank you. And thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Khalil. Thank you, David. Really appreciate it. Cheers.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I know we have a case study with you guys that we've got and some other webinars we've done with you. Maybe my team can throw that in the chat so folks can kind of dig in and see more of how Splunk did this and what they've done. And we actually collected some great data about the percentage of people activating habits weekly there as well. So my team will put that in the chat in a moment, and we can share that in a follow-on email as well. It's a couple of case studies that we did with you guys. Thanks very much for everything.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks for being here. My big insight, just as we close that off as well, I think just hearing that, it's like now we all need to learn how to have the conversation. That's the next step, and we're going to think a lot more about that. And I think the clumsy conversation frame is really powerful, and I love the framing we've done there. Just a couple of closing things. Stay with us. You know, we've been in this space of the science of diversity and inclusion for about 7 years. We're now working with about 180 organizations. A couple of ways to partner with you. We have a whole pathway, a year to 2 years of habit activation. If you're interested in kind of learning more about the pathway, we'll give you a poll in a moment to kind of respond to, and we can do a demo for you of seeing exactly how to move through the right habits. Secondly, something that we've started to do in the last month or so is a learning strategy audit. I would just say right now there's a fork in the road. Your company could make your entire learning strategy significantly worse or significantly better based on a few basic principles. So we've been doing some briefings with organizations and kind of free learning strategy audits to help you think about D&I learning, but also all of learning. And so you'll get an opportunity in a moment in a poll to select that as well if you're from an organization and interested in that. We also just recently started doing something we call the the NLI challenge, which is literally, as it says here, show us your whole budget for what you're doing with human skills, and we'll show you how to do it for 25% less, dramatically better, making it highly brain friendly. So you'll have an opportunity to put that in the chat in a moment. And then finally, this is an important hold the date. If you haven't seen this yet, encourage you to hold the date. November 10th to 12th is this year's summit. And this year, it's a 3-day global hackathon to make organizations better for humans, as in round the clock. It's dramatically cheaper, like 20% of what it used to be. And now it's literally 72 hours. What that means is the same content, but in 3 different time zones. So if you have colleagues in APAC or EMEA, they'll actually be able to join in and participate in their time zones. And so we're expecting a pretty big audience, but hold the date, November 10th to 12th, all time zones relevant. And we're experimenting and having our own growth mindset with a completely different way of doing this. I'll leave this on screen for what's next, but we'll just throw a poll up. Let us know how to support you. Let us know what we can help you with. Click the nothing for now, thanks, if that's the case. It helps us to know. We've put a number of options there. You can click as many as you want. We do have individual learning opportunities, including a certificate program in the Foundations of Neuro Leadership. We're considering a D&I focus program for talent executives as well at the moment. We're thinking about that. Just click as many of those as relevant to you, and someone will follow up in the next day or so. Khalil, just thanks for partnering today. We're experimenting, trying different things. It's been great to think about this together, and I'm really pondering on clumsy conversations and thinking about how many you and I have had over the years, and how many we all have as a company over the years, and how we should normalize and label that. And I think I see some writing coming up between us, maybe that you lead. There's something there, I think, to do. That's my big highlight from the session today. So thanks for partnering. Any closing comments before we hand back to Gabe?
No, just, I mean, honestly, it's always a pleasure to be on with folks. And I love seeing in the chat that people appreciate this time. And someone mentioned that these are kind of an oasis for them over the course of the week. And so we always want to be helpful and useful and use our science to create insights for folks. And just love the opportunity to do that and look forward to continuing to partner with folks. So it's always a pleasure. Thanks, David.
Thanks very much. And I don't know if we can leave that poll up for others who want to do that, but Gabe, back to you. Thanks very much, everyone. And thanks, Khalil. And Gabe, back to you for some closing comments.
Thanks so much, David. Thanks, Khalil.